This week's sermon is about the parable of the unjust steward. But to begin, to kick things off, I've got a couple of jokes about biblical scholars. Stay tuned. Before I dive into the heart of this sermon, I want to talk a little bit about biblical scholars, and I'm going to poke some fun at them with a few jokes. This will help set the stage for what biblical scholars have to say about the passage we just heard. And for those of you who are online, I would encourage you to read it. It's from Luke, and it's the parable of the unjust steward. So here's the first joke. Two biblical scholars meet in a hallway, and one says, "Good morning." And the other stands there thinking for a moment and then replies, "I'm not sure we have enough evidence to support that conclusion." And here's another. How many biblical scholars does it take to change a light bulb? One. But first, they must form a committee to decide if the original light bulb ever existed, whether it was part of a larger lighting tradition, and if the term light bulb is an accurate translation from the Greek. And here's my last one before I dive into the meat of the sermon. A biblical scholar and a taxi driver die, and they arrive at the pearly gates. And the taxi driver is ushered inside, welcomed warmly, and given a beautiful mansion. And the biblical scholar is led to a small, humble shack on the outskirts of heaven. The biblical scholar protests to St. Peter, and he says, "I've spent my whole life in devotion, publishing peer-reviewed articles and leading a distinguished academic career. Why does he get the mansion and I get the shack?" And St. Peter replies, "Oh, the taxi driver? Well, every time he drove, his passengers prayed. When you lectured, everyone slept." Now, it may seem like I'm unjustly poking fun at scholars, but here's the thing. If you ask one biblical scholar about a passage in the Bible, and then you ask another about the same passage, you're likely to get two different responses. Everyone will have a slightly different interpretation of the meaning. And that's where I want to begin with today's passage. We just heard, and maybe you have just read, the passage is universally considered, almost universally considered, to be the most difficult of Jesus's parables to understand. Now, those aren't my words. That's how it's been characterized. In reading it, it is an incredibly difficult passage to pick apart and tease the meaning out of. Yet when you get to the end, despite all the complexity and the debate, all of the nuances of language, all the individual verses within the passage, there's simplicity. And that's really one of the beautiful things about the parables that Jesus used to teach the disciples and the crowds. Regardless of IQ, regardless of work or employment, regardless of upbringing, whether someone was rich or poor, the parables were universal in their ability to convey a message about how the disciples were supposed to live and how we are to live as disciples. The parable begins with an introduction. We learn there's a rich man and a steward, and the steward isn't doing a very good job at his job. He's wasting the rich man's goods. The rich man says, "I can't have this anymore." And the steward, for lack of a better word, freaks out. I think most people would freak out if they were employed by somebody and that employer came and said, "You're not doing a good job," especially if they knew that was the precursor for having to find a different job in a small town where word travels fast. And that everything that the employer was going to say about them not doing a good job, maybe they're showing up late, taking extra long lunches, not dealing with clients fairly, maybe even skimming off the top, if that employee knew what the employer was going to say was true. Now, the steward is freaking out. And he's thinking to himself, "You can't take this away from me. I need this job. I need to be here. I need the money to support myself and have things I need to live." And he also realizes, "I'm not strong enough to dig. Manual labor is out of the question. And I'm too ashamed to beg. That's beneath me. I'm not going to stand on a corner with a sign all day in the heat hoping for scraps, a few coins from someone willing to give me money. And so he decides to make it so that people will be willing to give him a job after he's dismissed. He wants people to welcome him into their homes because he's done them a favor. Now, I'm not sure I'd give a job to someone willing to do that, because what goes around comes around, but that's not the point. What does he do? He goes to the master's debtors. How much do you owe him? One says 100 jugs of olive oil, and the steward says, make that 50. To another debtor, how much do you owe? 100 containers of wheat. Go ahead and make that 80. And then something unexpected happens. The master commends the unjust steward, the dishonest manager, and the master says, wow, you acted so shrewdly. This is great. I can't believe you did this. Now, this isn't advantageous to the master having the debtors owe you less, because of course what goes around comes around, but it is, what's the word I'm looking for? It's ingenious the way the steward goes about it. He's been pretty creative about ensuring that when he loses the job, he'll have something to fall back on. All of these debtors he's given a break to will say, hey, that guy was nice to me. He did me a favor, so I'm indebted to him. And this puts the steward in a position of power. But here's the simplicity, the point of what Jesus was saying. He wasn't saying, oh yeah, it's okay to do this because you've got to support yourself. So by whatever means necessary, it's fine to shortchange your employer with backroom deals. That wasn't the point at all. The point was about faithfulness. Jesus tells us whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. The parable illustrates what it means to be unfaithful. If you are willing to be dishonest in something small, if you're only looking out for yourself and willing to cut corners, that same character flaw will show up in bigger things too. And Jesus continues, if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? The steward in this parable didn't own the business. He was responsible for running it, overseeing it, but he didn't own it. So it really wasn't his to give away. It was clever, no doubt, but it wasn't his to give. And it's the last verse in the passage, which in its simplicity is so incredibly powerful. No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. You cannot serve God and still be chasing after the money. If all you are pursuing is wealth for yourself, if your decisions are driven by the pursuit of money, you cannot simultaneously be serving God. Amen. Have a blessed week, everyone, and stay safe. And I'll see you next week. Take care.